In the grand halls of Adelaide Cottage, where morning light dances through ancient windows and the scent of fresh roses drifts from manicured gardens, a 5-year-old prince was about to make the most important request of his young life. Prince Louis Arthur Charles, third child of the Prince and Princess of Wales, stood barefoot on the polished wooden floors of his mother's study, his small hands clasped behind his back in a gesture so reminiscent of his great-grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, that it would have brought tears to royal watchers' eyes. But this wasn't about protocol or royal duties. This was about adventure, independence, and a little boy's burning desire to prove he was ready for something bigger than the protected walls of his royal world. What Prince Louis was about to ask his mother, Princess Catherine, would challenge every protective instinct she had as both a mother and a future queen. It would test the delicate balance between royal security and childhood freedom, between duty and dreams, between keeping her youngest safe and allowing him to spread his wings. The conversation that was about to unfold would not only change the course of Prince Louis's summer but would also reveal the profound depths of a mother's love when faced with her child's first real plea for independence. In a world where every royal move is scrutinized, where security details shadow every step, and where childhood adventures must be carefully orchestrated, one little prince was about to make a case that would surprise everyone, including himself. This is the story of courage found in small voices, of trust built between generations, and of the moment when Prince Louis discovered that the biggest adventures often begin with the simplest request: "Mom, can I please?" The morning sun cast long shadows across the breakfast room at Adelaide Cottage as Prince Louis pushed his scrambled eggs around his plate, creating small mountains and valleys with his silver fork. His older siblings, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, chattered about their upcoming school activities, but Louis remained unusually quiet, his mind occupied with thoughts far bigger than his 5 years should contain. Princess Catherine noticed immediately. As a mother of 3, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read her children's moods, and Louis's contemplative silence was as loud as any tantrum. She watched as he abandoned his breakfast entirely, sliding down from his chair to press his nose against the tall windows that overlooked the sprawling grounds of their Windsor home. "What's capturing your imagination this morning, Lou?" Catherine asked gently, using the family nickname that never failed to make her youngest smile. But, today, Louis barely turned from the window. "Mummy," he said, his small voice carrying an unusual weight, "why do George and Charlotte get to do everything first?" The question hung in the air like morning mist. Catherine set down her teacup, recognizing this as one of those pivotal parenting moments that would either build her son's confidence or inadvertently crush his spirit. She moved to join him at the window, kneeling so they were at the same height. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Louis pressed his palms against the cool glass, his breath creating small clouds that quickly disappeared. "George gets to go on royal visits with Papa. Charlotte gets to attend state dinners sometimes. I just get to stay home with the nanny or go to boring garden parties where everyone tells me how cute I am." Catherine's heart clenched. She had been so focused on protecting Louis from the overwhelming aspects of royal life that she hadn't realized he felt left out rather than sheltered. At 5, Louis was indeed the youngest, but he was also remarkably perceptive for his age, often surprising adults with his observations about the world around him. "You know," Catherine said carefully, "being the youngest in a royal family isn't about being left behind. It's about having the time to choose your own path." Louis turned to face her, his eyes bright with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Before Catherine could answer, Prince William appeared in the doorway, still in his morning running gear, his face flushed from exercise. He had clearly caught the tail end of their conversation. "Good morning, family," William said, kissing Catherine's cheek before ruffling Louis's already messy hair. "What are we discussing so seriously?" "Louis feels he's missing out on adventures because he's the youngest," Catherine explained, shooting her husband a meaningful look. William knelt beside them, his expression growing serious as he studied his youngest son's face. "Adventures, eh? What kind of adventures are you thinking about, Louis?" And there it was, the opening Louis had been waiting for. His small frame seemed to grow taller as he straightened his shoulders, preparing to make his case. "I want to go on a real adventure. Not a pretend one in the garden or a carefully planned visit where security tells me where to stand and what to touch. I want to do something that George and Charlotte haven't done. Something that's just mine." The request was so earnest, so filled with a 5-year-old's version of determination, that both parents fell silent.
Louis continued, his confidence building.
"I've been thinking about it for weeks, Mummy.
I know I'm little, but I'm brave. Remember when I climbed the big oak tree last month even though Charlotte said I couldn't? Remember when I helped Papa with the horses even though they're much bigger than me?" Catherine did remember.
She remembered, her heart stopping as she watched her fearless youngest scale the ancient tree with the confidence of someone twice his age. She remembered the pride in William's voice as he told her how naturally Louis had handled the horses, showing none of the nervousness that had initially plagued Charlotte.
"What exactly are you asking for, Louis?" William asked gently.
Louis took a deep breath, as if he had rehearsed this moment many times.
"I want to go camping. Real camping. Not in the garden pavilion or at Balmoral with all the servants.
I want to sleep under the stars and cook food on a fire and maybe even see some wild animals.
Just me and you, Mummy. Or just me and Papa. A proper adventure."
The simplicity of the request was what made it so profound. In a world where royal children were typically whisked away to exotic locations with full security details and carefully curated experiences, Louis was asking for something beautifully ordinary yet extraordinarily meaningful, unstructured time in nature with one of his parents.
Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion.
Her youngest wasn't asking for a pony or a new toy or even a trip to Disneyland. He was asking for independence, for trust, for the chance to prove himself capable of something real.
"Camping," she repeated thoughtfully. "Yes," Louis said eagerly, sensing he had his mother's attention. "I've been reading about it in my adventure books. Did you know that people used to sleep outside all the time before they invented houses? Did you know that you can cook fish right over a fire? Did you know that if you're very quiet, deer might come close enough to touch?"
His enthusiasm was infectious, but Catherine's mind was already racing through the complications. Security protocols, press coverage, the logistics of taking a member of the royal family into an uncontrolled environment, it seemed impossible. "Lou," she began carefully, "camping sounds wonderful in theory, but there are so many things we'd need to consider."
"Like what?"
Louis interrupted, his lower lip beginning to tremble slightly.
"Like the fact that I'm too little? Like the fact that it might be dangerous? Like the fact that princes don't do normal things?" The last question hit Catherine like a physical blow. In trying to protect her children from the negative aspects of their unique position, had she inadvertently made them feel trapped by it? William cleared his throat.
"Louis, come here for a moment." Louis walked over to his father, who lifted him onto his lap.
"Being a prince doesn't mean you can't do normal things.
It just means we have to be extra careful about how we do them."
"But, you know what?
Some of my best memories from childhood were the times I got to do ordinary things with extraordinary people, like your mummy and daddy."
"So I could go camping?" Louis asked, hope blooming in his voice.
Catherine and William exchanged a long look over their son's head. In that silent conversation, they weighed Louis's genuine need for adventure against their parental fears, his desire for independence against the reality of their royal responsibilities. "Tell us more about this camping trip you've been planning," Catherine said finally, settling cross-legged on the floor beside William's chair.
Louis's face lit up like Christmas morning.
"Well, I thought we could go to the forest part of the Sandringham estate. I know it's still our land, but it feels wild there.
We could bring a tent, a real one that we have to put up ourselves.
And we could bring fishing rods and try to catch our dinner.
And
we could tell stories around the fire and look for shooting stars."
His detailed planning revealed how seriously he had been considering this adventure.
This wasn't a whim or a momentary fancy. Louis had been thinking, dreaming, and preparing for this conversation.
"What if it rains?" Catherine asked.
"Then, we get wet and dry off by the fire afterward," Louis replied without hesitation.
"Adventures aren't supposed to be perfect, Mummy. That's what makes them adventures."
The wisdom in his young voice stopped Catherine short. When had her 5-year-old become so philosophical about risk and reward?
"What about scary noises in the night?" William asked. Then, you'll be there to keep me safe, Papa. But, I don't think I'll be scared. I think I'll be too excited to be scared. What about uncomfortable sleeping arrangements? I'll bring my pillow from home, but everything else should be camp stuff. Otherwise, it's just like sleeping in a fancy bedroom that happens to be outside. For every concern they raised, Lewis had an answer. Not the reckless responses of a child who hadn't thought things through, but the careful considerations of someone who had genuinely prepared for this conversation. Catherine found herself remembering her own childhood camping experiences with her family. The sense of freedom, the connection to nature, the satisfaction of doing things for herself rather than having them done for her. Those experiences had shaped her character in ways that no amount of formal education could have achieved. Lewis, she said finally, this is a very big request. Camping might seem simple, but, for our family, it involves a lot of planning and preparation. Lewis's face fell slightly, but he didn't give up. I know it's complicated, Mummy. But, couldn't we try? Even if it's just for one night? Even if we have to bring security guards who hide behind trees? I just want to try being brave and independent, like George and Charlotte get to be in their own ways. And, there it was again, that underlying need to prove himself, to carve out his own space in a family where his siblings had already established their roles and identities. Catherine looked at her youngest son, really looked at him, and saw not the baby of the family but a young person with his own dreams and ambitions. She saw someone ready to take his first real step toward independence, even if that step was into a tent in the woods. What do you think, Papa? She asked William, though she could already see the answer in her husband's eyes. William was quiet for a long moment, studying Lewis's expectant face. Finally, he spoke. I think, he said slowly, that every young prince needs at least one proper adventure before he learns that most of life is meetings and ribbon cuttings. Lewis's eyes went wide. Does that mean yes? It means, Catherine said, her decision crystallizing as she spoke, that we're going to seriously consider it. But, Lewis, if we do this, it has to be done properly. That means planning, preparation, and probably some practice runs in the garden first. Really? Lewis whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. Really, Catherine confirmed. But, I have conditions. Lewis nodded eagerly, willing to agree to anything. First, we start small. One night, close to home, with proper preparation. Second, you have to prove you can handle responsibility by helping with all the planning and setup. Third, this stays between our family for now. No telling your friends at school until after we've actually done it. I promise, Mummy. I promise all of those things. Catherine smiled, feeling a mixture of terror and excitement at what she had just agreed to. Then, I suppose we'd better start planning your first big adventure, Prince Louis. As Louis launched himself into his mother's arms, chattering excitedly about tents and campfires and shooting stars, Catherine caught William's eye over their son's head. Her husband was smiling, but she could see the same mixture of pride and concern in his expression that she felt in her own heart. They were about to embark on uncharted territory, not just in terms of royal protocol, but in terms of parenting. Lewis's heartfelt plea had opened a door that couldn't be closed, and stepping through it would change all of them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The following weeks transformed Adelaide Cottage into something resembling a military planning headquarters, if military headquarters were run by an enthusiastic 5-year-old with an encyclopedic knowledge of camping equipment gleaned from library books and nature documentaries. Princess Catherine had never seen Louis so focused on anything for such an extended period. Every morning, he would appear at breakfast with new questions, suggestions, or concerns about their upcoming adventure. He had commandeered a corner of the morning room, where he kept careful lists written in his careful, blocky handwriting, complete with drawings of tents, campfires, and what appeared to be himself wearing an explorer's hat. Mummy, he announced one Tuesday morning, consulting his latest list, we need to discuss the matter of bears. Catherine nearly choked on her coffee. Bears? Yes. I've been reading about camping safety, and apparently bears like food. Do we have bears in Norfolk? William, who was reviewing official papers at the breakfast table, couldn't hide his smile. No, Louis. We don't have bears in England. Haven't for hundreds of years. Louis looked both relieved and slightly disappointed. What about wolves?
No wolves either, Catherine assured him.
Foxes?
Yes, but they're not dangerous to people. Louis made a careful note on his list.
Good to know. What about badgers? I read that badgers can be grumpy if you bother them.
We won't bother the badgers, William promised solemnly, treating his son's concerns with the gravity they deserved.
The planning sessions had become a family affair.
Charlotte, initially skeptical about her little brother's boring camping idea, had gradually become interested in the logistics. She appointed herself as Louis's research assistant, helping him identify which plants were safe to touch and which birds they might see in the Sandringham woods. George, despite his 11-year-old dignity, found himself drawn into discussions about tent setup and fire safety. He had started sharing stories from his own scouting experiences, giving Louis tips about staying warm and comfortable outdoors. "The thing is, Lou," George said one evening as they sat in the garden watching the sunset, "camping isn't just about sleeping outside. It's about proving to yourself that you can handle things you've never done before."
Louis nodded seriously. "Is that why you wanted to go on those royal visits with Papa? To prove you could handle new things?" George considered this. "I suppose so.
Sometimes being the oldest means you have to try new things first, but being the youngest means you get to learn from everyone else's mistakes."
That's actually quite useful. These conversations were revealing aspects of her children that Catherine hadn't fully appreciated before.
Louis's camping request had opened up discussions about independence, responsibility, and growing up that might not have happened naturally for years.
The practical preparations were equally enlightening.
Catherine had assumed that as members of the royal family, they would simply purchase the finest camping equipment available.
Louis, however, had other ideas.
"I want us to earn our camping gear," he announced during one of their planning sessions.
"What do you mean, sweetheart?"
"I mean, I want to learn how to do things properly before we go. Like, I want to learn how to tie proper knots, and how to start a fire safely, and how to cook something other than toast." This led to a series of weekend activities that were unlike anything Adelaide Cottage had ever seen.
William taught Louis to tie basic knots using rope stretched between two garden chairs.
Catherine showed him how to prepare simple meals that could be cooked over an open fire. They practiced setting up a tent on the back lawn, with Louis insisting on reading the instructions himself and figuring out which pole went where.
The most challenging aspect wasn't the practical skills, however.
It was the security arrangements. Catherine had known this would be complicated, but she hadn't fully grasped how complicated until she sat in a meeting room at Kensington Palace, facing a table full of protection officers who looked as though she had suggested taking Louis on an unescorted trip to Mars. "Ma'am," said Inspector Davies, the head of their security detail, "with all due respect, camping presents numerous vulnerabilities that we simply cannot mitigate without significantly altering the experience you're hoping to provide."
"Such as?"
"Uncontrolled environment, limited communication capabilities, restricted egress routes, potential for unauthorized photography, and that's just the beginning."
"If His Royal Highness wants an outdoor experience, might I suggest the Safari Lodge at Balmoral? It's rustic but secure." Catherine shook her head. Louis specifically asked for a real camping experience. Sleeping in a luxury lodge defeats the purpose entirely. Then, perhaps a compromise, suggested another officer.
"Full security detail, but positioned at a distance. Communications equipment disguised as camping gear.
Emergency evacuation plan with helicopters on standby." How many people are we talking about?
Minimum 12 officers, plus support staff, medical team, communications specialists. Catherine felt her heart sink. The picture Inspector Davies was painting involved more people than most small weddings. It would be impossible for Louis to feel like he was having a genuine adventure with an army of protectors surrounding him. "What if we stayed on royal property?" she asked.
"What if it was just Louis, William, and me, with a minimal security presence positioned well out of sight?"
The officers exchanged glances.
"Ma'am, we understand the appeal, but we have protocols."
The protocols exist to serve the family, not the other way around, Catherine said firmly. If we can't find a way to give a 5-year-old a safe camping experience on his own family's property, then, perhaps we need to reconsider our approach to security. It took 3 more meetings and several phone calls to senior officials before a compromise was reached. The camping trip would take place in a secluded section of the Sandringham estate, with security officers positioned at the perimeter but instructed to remain invisible unless there was an actual emergency. Communication would be maintained through a discreet device disguised as a camping radio. Medical support would be available within minutes but out of sight. Most importantly, it would be just Catherine, William, and Louis. No servants, no staff, no additional family members. Just the 3 of them and the woods. When Catherine told Louis about the final arrangements, his reaction surprised her. "Will the security people be scared, Mummy? Because we're sleeping outside?" "I don't think they'll be scared, sweetheart. They're just doing their job to keep us safe." "But they have to stay outside all night too, just farther away. That's like camping, but without the fun parts." "Maybe we should bring them some hot chocolate." Catherine's heart melted a little more. Even in his excitement about his own adventure, Louis was thinking about the people who would be working to protect him. The weather forecast for their chosen weekend looked perfect: clear skies, mild temperatures, no rain expected. Louis had been checking the weather reports obsessively for days, as if his intense focus could somehow guarantee perfect conditions. 2 days before the camping trip, Louis developed what could only be described as adventure fever. He couldn't sit still during meals, kept checking and rechecking his carefully packed camping bag, and peppered everyone with last-minute questions. "What if I can't sleep?" "Then, you'll lie in your sleeping bag and listen to the night sounds," Catherine assured him. "What if I get cold?" "We'll have extra blankets and warm clothes." "What if I love it so much I want to stay forever?" William laughed. "Then, we'll have to explain to your teachers why you're not coming back to school on Monday." The night before their departure, Louis appeared in his parents' bedroom doorway wearing his pajamas and a serious expression. "Mommy? Papa? I need to tell you something important." Catherine pulled back the covers, inviting him to climb into bed between them. "What is it, love?" "I want to say thank you," Louis said solemnly. "I know this camping trip is making things complicated for everyone. Charlotte told me that George never got to do anything like this when he was 5, and I know there are lots of people who have to work extra hard to make sure we're safe." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart. But I really needed this," Louis continued. "I needed to know that I'm brave enough to do something big. Not just big for a 5-year-old, but actually big. And I needed to know that you and Papa trust me enough to let me try." William reached over to ruffle his son's hair. "Louis, you've already proven how brave and responsible you are just by planning this so carefully. The camping trip is just the fun part. Do you really think I'm ready for this?" Louis asked, a hint of nervousness finally creeping into his voice. Catherine gathered him closer. "I think you've been ready for adventure for a while now. We're the ones who needed time to catch up." That night, Louis slept between his parents, one small hand clutching his father's arm and the other holding his mother's hand. In the morning, he would wake up and begin his first real adventure. But, for now, he was simply their youngest child, safe and loved and dreaming of campfires and shooting stars. Outside their window, the moon cast silver shadows across the gardens of Adelaide Cottage, and, somewhere in those shadows, security officers were already beginning their own preparations for a camping trip unlike any they had ever supervised. In less than 24 hours, Prince Louis would discover whether the adventure he had dreamed of would live up to his careful planning and boundless hopes. Catherine lay awake long after her husband and son had fallen asleep, alternating between excitement and terror at what they were about to attempt. Tomorrow would test not just Louis's readiness for independence, but her own ability to let him grow beyond the safe boundary she had constructed around all her children. The camping trip had started as Louis's dream, but it had become something much more significant, a family's first tentative step toward acknowledging that even princes need the freedom to take risks, to prove themselves, and to discover who they are when no one is watching except the stars. The morning of the camping adventure dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of golden sunlight that seemed to promise perfect weather ahead. Prince Louis was awake before his alarm, sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor with his camping checklist spread before him, methodically going through his packed bag one final time. Sleeping bag, check. Warm jumper, check. Torch with extra batteries, check. My special camping mug that George gave me, check. Catherine found him there when she came to wake him, already dressed in his carefully chosen camping outfit, sturdy trousers, a comfortable shirt, and the hiking boots they had bought specifically for this adventure. "Ready, explorer?" she asked, sitting beside him on the floor. Louis looked up at her with eyes bright with excitement and just a hint of nervous anticipation. "Mummy, I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this is all a dream." "It's not a dream, sweetheart. Today is really happening." After breakfast, the family gathered in the courtyard where their vehicle was loaded with camping supplies. George and Charlotte had been surprisingly emotional about their little brother's adventure, both offering last-minute advice and making him promise to tell them everything when he returned. "Remember," Charlotte said, adjusting Louis's backpack straps, "if you see any interesting birds, try to remember what they look like so you can tell me about them." George handed Louis a small notebook. "Write down anything important that happens. Papa always says that adventures are twice as good when you can remember them properly later." William appeared carrying the tent bag, looking more relaxed than Catherine had seen him in months. "Right then, Prince Louis. Are you ready for your first real camping expedition?" "Yes, Papa. I've been ready for weeks." The drive to Sandringham took just over an hour, during which Louis peppered his parents with questions about everything from wildlife safety to campfire cooking techniques. His excitement was infectious, and, by the time they arrived at the estate, even Catherine felt her nervousness giving way to genuine anticipation. Their destination was a clearing deep in the woods, accessible only by a narrow track that wound through ancient oak and beech trees. Catherine had visited this spot once before, years ago, but she had forgotten how peaceful it felt, how completely removed from the outside world. "This is perfect," Louis breathed as they climbed out of the car. "It's like a secret forest hideout." The clearing was indeed magical. Surrounded by towering trees, with a small stream running along one edge and a natural fire pit in the center, it felt like something from a storybook. Dappled sunlight filtered through the canopy above, and the only sounds were birdsong and the gentle murmur of water over stones. "Right then," William said, pulling the tent bag from the car. "What's the first step, Chief?" Louis consulted his notebook with all the seriousness of a seasoned expedition leader. "First, we choose the best spot for the tent. It should be flat, away from any dead tree branches that might fall, and close enough to the stream for water but not so close that we might get wet if it rains." For the next hour, Louis directed the tent setup with impressive competence. He had clearly taken their practice sessions seriously, remembering not only how to assemble the poles but also how to properly stake the corners and adjust the guy ropes for stability. "There," he said finally, stepping back to admire their work. "Our temporary home." Catherine felt a surge of pride watching her youngest son survey their campsite with such satisfaction. The tent wasn't perfectly positioned, and one corner was slightly lower than the others, but it was standing securely and it was entirely their own work. "What's next on the agenda?" William asked. "Exploring," Louis said decisively. "We need to know our surroundings before it gets dark. And we should collect firewood." The exploration turned into an impromptu nature lesson as they wandered through the surrounding woods. Louis's careful observation of everything around him reminded Catherine of how much children could learn when they weren't being formally taught. He noticed the different types of bark on various trees, spotted several birds that Charlotte would want to hear about, and found a particularly interesting fallen log that he declared would be perfect for seating around their campfire. "Look, Mummy," he said, crouching beside the stream. "You can see the bottom perfectly. The water is so clear." Catherine knelt beside him, watching tiny fish dart between the rocks. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "It's better than beautiful," Louis said seriously. "It's real. Like, properly real, not just pretty because someone arranged it to be pretty." The profundity of his observation caught Catherine off guard. At 5 years old, Lewis had somehow articulated something she had never quite been able to express about the difference between their carefully maintained royal residences and the unmanaged beauty of the natural world. By afternoon, they had established themselves as competent campers. William had taught Lewis how to safely build and maintain a fire, with constant supervision but increasing independence. Catherine had shown him how to prepare their simple dinner: fish that William had brought from home, potatoes wrapped in foil, and vegetables that could be cooked over the coals. But the real magic began as evening approached. As the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Lewis became quieter, more contemplative. He sat on his log beside the fire, occasionally poking at the embers with a stick, watching the sparks dance upward toward the darkening sky. "Papa," he said eventually, "do you think great-grandmother ever went camping when she was little?" William considered the question seriously. "I don't think Queen Elizabeth went camping the way we're camping now. But she did spend a lot of time outdoors when she was young. She learned to drive during the war, and she worked on cars and trucks. She knew how to do practical things." "Good," Lewis said with satisfaction. "I want to know how to do practical things too." As darkness fell properly, the transformation of their little clearing was remarkable. The fire created a warm circle of light that seemed to hold the rest of the world at bay. Above them, stars began to appear in numbers that were impossible to see from their homes in London or Windsor. "Oh," Lewis whispered, tilting his head back to stare at the sky. "Oh, there are so many of them." Catherine lay back on the blanket they had spread beside the fire, pulling Lewis down beside her. "When I was little, your grandmother used to tell me that each star was a wish someone had made." "Really?" Lewis's voice was full of wonder. "Well, that's what she told me. I don't know if it's scientifically accurate." "I don't care if it's scientifically accurate," Lewis said firmly. "I like the idea. Look how many wishes are up there." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. The fire crackled and popped, sending occasional sparks spiraling upward. "Mummy," Lewis said eventually, his voice sleepy but content, "this is exactly what I imagined it would be like." "Is it everything you hoped for?" "It's better," he said simply. "Because I did it. I mean, we all did it together, but I was the one who asked for it, and planned it, and made it happen. That makes it feel different." William, who had been feeding small branches to the fire, looked over at his wife and youngest son. "Different how?" Lewis was quiet for a moment, searching for the words. "Like it's really mine. Not just something that happened to me, but something I made happen." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Catherine said, her throat tight with emotion. As the evening progressed, Lewis's energy began to flag, but he was clearly determined not to miss a moment of his adventure. He fought sleep heroically, his eyes drooping by the fire before he would jerk awake, afraid he might miss something important. "What if I can't sleep in the tent?" he asked as they prepared for bed. "What if it's too different from home?" "Then, we'll sit with you until you feel comfortable," William assured him. "But I think you might be surprised how tired you are after all this fresh air and activity." The tent, when they finally settled into their sleeping bags, felt cozy rather than cramped. Lewis had insisted on the middle position, with his parents on either side, and Catherine had to admit that the arrangement felt perfect. "Listen," Lewis whispered into the darkness. Outside their tent, the forest was alive with gentle sounds: the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush, the whisper of wind through the trees. "It's like the forest is talking to itself," Lewis said drowsily. "What do you think it's saying?" Catherine asked. "Welcome to the adventure, Prince Louis," he murmured, already half asleep. "You did it. You really did it." Catherine lay awake for a while after Lewis's breathing had settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the day they had shared. Her youngest son's camping adventure had been about much more than sleeping outdoors. It had been his first real step toward independence, his first successful campaign for something he wanted badly enough to plan and argue for and see through to completion. More than that, it had been a reminder to her that parenting meant not just protecting her children, but also knowing when to step back and let them prove their own capabilities. Lewis had needed this adventure not just for the joy of camping, but for the confidence that comes from conceiving a dream and making it reality. When she finally drifted off to sleep, it was with the sound of her son's peaceful breathing beside her and the knowledge that they had given him something irreplaceable, the memory of a time when he asked for something important and received not just permission, but trust. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with Lewis awake first, unzipping the tent flap to peer out at their campsite in the early light. "Mummy, Papa, wake up," he whispered excitedly. "The forest looks completely different in the morning. It's like we slept through a transformation." And, indeed, the clearing did look different, fresher, somehow, with dew sparkling on the grass and shafts of golden sunlight slanting through the trees. Their campfire had died down to cold ashes, but the stones around it still held the memory of warmth. Over breakfast cooked on their camp stove, Lewis insisted on helping with every step. They discussed the night's adventures and planned their morning activities. Lewis wanted to explore further upstream, to see if they could find the source of their little stream. "We're not just camping," he announced as he carefully packed away his sleeping bag. "We're proper explorers now." The morning exploration was every bit as successful as the evening had been. They found the stream's source in a natural spring bubbling up from between moss-covered rocks, discovered a family of rabbits that watched them with curious but unafraid eyes, and collected interesting stones and leaves for Lewis to show Charlotte when they returned home. But it was during the packing up process that the most significant moment occurred. As they disassembled their tent and gathered their belongings, Lewis became increasingly quiet. Catherine assumed he was simply tired from the adventure and the early morning, but when she found him sitting alone on their log beside the cold fire pit, she realized something deeper was happening. "What's troubling you, sweetheart?" Lewis looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "I don't want it to be over, Mummy. I don't want to go back to being just the little prince who stays home while everyone else has adventures." Catherine's heart broke a little. "Oh, Lewis. This was the best thing I've ever done," he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I felt so brave and so capable, and I proved I could do something difficult. But now we're going home, and tomorrow I'll just be little Prince Lewis again, and everyone will tell me I'm too young for everything." Catherine sat beside him on the log, pulling him close. "Sweetheart, going home doesn't erase what you've accomplished here. You'll always be the prince who convinced his parents to take him camping. You'll always be the 5-year-old who planned his own adventure and carried it through successfully. But will there be other adventures? Real ones?" Before Catherine could answer, William joined them, sitting on Lewis's other side. "Lewis," he said gently, "do you know what the most important thing about adventures is?" Lewis shook his head. "It's not the adventure itself. It's what the adventure teaches you about yourself. And what this adventure has taught us about you is that you're ready for much more than we realized." Lewis looked up hopefully. "Does that mean there will be more adventures?" Catherine and William exchanged a look over their son's head. "It means," Catherine said carefully, "that this is just the beginning. You've proven you can handle responsibility and independence. That opens doors to all sorts of possibilities." "Like what?" "Well," William said thoughtfully, "there's camping in other places. There's hiking and exploring and learning outdoor skills. There are adventures that Charlotte and George never had when they were your age, because we didn't know 5-year-olds could be as capable as you've shown yourself to be." Lewis's tears dried as quickly as they had appeared. "Really?" "Really," Catherine confirmed. "But each adventure has to be earned, just like you earned this one. By showing you're responsible, by planning carefully, by proving you can handle whatever challenges come up." "I can do that," Lewis said with complete confidence. "I'm good at planning and being responsible." As they finished packing and prepared to leave their magical clearing, Lewis took one last look around. "Thank you," he said to the forest in general. "Thank you for being the place where I learned I was braver than I thought." The drive home was filled with Lewis's chatter about everything they had seen and done, all the things he wanted to tell his siblings, all the ways this adventure had exceeded his expectations. But Catherine noticed that mixed in with the excitement was a new quality, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. When they arrived back at Adelaide Cottage, George and Charlotte were waiting in the courtyard, eager to hear about their brother's adventure. As Louis regaled them with stories of campfires and shooting stars, of morning mist and rabbits and the perfectly clear stream, Catherine saw something she hadn't expected. Her older children weren't just being polite about their little brother's camping trip. They were genuinely interested, even a little envious. Louis had done something they hadn't done, experienced something uniquely his own, and they respected him for it.
"So what's your next adventure going to be?"
Charlotte asked.
Louis grinned. "I'm thinking about learning to kayak. Or maybe rock climbing.
Or possibly both." Catherine felt a moment of parental panic, but it was quickly replaced by something else: pride in the confident, capable young person her youngest was becoming. That evening, as she tucked Louis into his own bed for the first time in days, he was still glowing with the satisfaction of his successful adventure. "Mummy," he said sleepily, "I know I'm still the youngest, and I know I still have lots to learn.
But I don't feel like the baby of the family anymore."
"What do you feel like?" "I feel like Prince Louis who goes on adventures," he said with satisfaction.
"And that's exactly who I wanted to be."
As Catherine turned off his light and closed his door, she realized that Louis's heartfelt plea for his first big adventure had accomplished exactly what he had hoped it would. He had proven to himself, and to everyone else, that he was capable of more than anyone had imagined. But, more than that, he had reminded his entire family that growing up isn't about reaching a certain age or achieving specific milestones. It's about having the courage to ask for what you need, the determination to see it through, and the wisdom to recognize that every ending is also a beginning. Prince Louis's first camping adventure was over, but his journey toward independence had only just begun.